Some killers escaped the needle, but inside, justice didn't wait, and when the locks clicked shut, so did their fate. These weren't just criminals. They were the ones even murderers couldn't stand. Men who wore their evil proudly, who laughed at their victims, who thought prison meant safety. But inside these walls, safety doesn't exist. There's no protection from the hands of the damned. This is about the most hated monsters ever locked in a cage, who never made it out. Their crimes were unthinkable, but what happened to them was unforgettable. And it all begins with the one they called the Nurse Dorm Killer. Number 16, Richard Speck. He was a drifter, a drunk, and a sadist. In 1966, he broke into a Chicago townhouse, tied up 9 women, and slaughtered 8 of them. One survivor hid under a bed and lived to tell the world. Speck was sentenced to death, but when the Supreme Court struck down capital punishment, he got life instead. And what he did with it made the outrage worse. In the 1980s, videos surfaced, smuggled out of Stateville prison. Speck, now plump and unbothered, was seen engaging in sex acts with inmates and laughing about the murders. He said killing those nurses was just like nothing. No remorse, no justice, just decades of air he didn't deserve. On December 5th, 1991, Speck died of a heart attack in a hospital near Stateville. No blades, no fists, no blood. Just a quiet end for a man who gave no one peace. He's the only one on this list who didn't die violently. But in many ways, his death was the cruelest contrast. Because the rest? They weren't so lucky. Number 15, Richard Loeb. He was young, wealthy, brilliant, and he believed that made him untouchable. In 1924, he and Nathan Leopold lured 14-year-old Bobby Franks into a car, bludgeoned him with a chisel, and dumped his body in a culvert. Their motive? To prove they could commit the perfect crime. It wasn't perfect, it was grotesque, and it earned Loeb a life sentence in Stateville Penitentiary. But inside those concrete walls, Loeb's arrogance stayed intact. He reportedly manipulated weaker inmates, flaunted his intelligence, and played power games with those who had nothing to lose. On January 28, 1936, he stepped into the prison shower and never came out. His killer, James Day. His weapon, a straight razor obtained inside. Loeb was slashed over 50 times, throat opened, hands shredded from defense wounds. The scene was so violent, guards initially thought multiple attackers were involved, but Day claimed it was self-defense, said Loeb had propositioned him, then attacked. No one questioned it further. The official ruling justified. Loeb's death wasn't a gang hit. It wasn't revenge for his crime. It was personal, fueled by prison dynamics no outsider would ever fully understand. The perfect crime didn't work on the outside. But inside, Day's act was buried without a trial. Number 14, Thor Nis Christiansen. He was a Danish-American predator with a clean face and a rotting mind. In the late 1970s, he stalked college campuses across California, targeting young women who looked alike. Long brown hair, parted down the middle. 4 women vanished. Each was found later, dumped like garbage, shot in the head. But the horror didn't stop there. Christiansen kept their bodies. What he did with them in death was worse than what he did in life. Necrophilia, mutilation, obsession. He wanted control, not just of the moment, but of memory. He was caught in 1979 after a 5th victim survived. A woman he tried to abduct escaped, and later spotted him in a bar, alive and smug. That sighting ended his freedom. He was sentenced to life in Folsom State Prison, but not for long. On March 30th, 1981, less than a year after his sentencing, Christiansen was found dead in a prison courtyard. No warning, no noise, no witnesses. He'd been stabbed once, precisely, cleanly. The prison launched an investigation and closed it just as fast. No suspects were ever named. No motive was officially released. In the official record, it was just another inmate-on-inmate killing. In reality, it felt like an execution. No names came forward, and the silence said everything. Thor Nis Christiansen preyed on the innocent, violated the dead, and believed he'd be remembered for his mind. But inside Folsom, someone made sure he'd be remembered for his silence. Because in that place, even monsters have predators. Number 13. Albert DeSalvo. He confessed to 13 murders. But even in death, no one was sure if he was telling the truth. Albert DeSalvo, better known as the Boston Strangler, became a household name in the early 1960s. A wave of terror swept through Massachusetts as women, young and old, living alone, were found strangled in their apartments. No signs of forced entry, no clear motive, just methodical, hands-on murder. In 1965, DeSalvo confessed. He described details never made public. He led police to scenes only the killer would know. But there was a problem. No physical evidence, no charges for murder. He was sentenced instead for multiple assaults and robberies. And as years passed, doubts grew. Was he a manipulator, craving infamy, or the real face behind one of America's most terrifying crime sprees? In Walpole State Prison, the inmates had already decided. On November 26, 1973, DeSalvo told a fellow prisoner he was ready to talk, ready to go public with new information. Hours later, he was found dead in his cell. 16 stab wounds, chest, neck, back. Whoever killed him did it up close, and without hesitation. The prison offered no explanation, no suspects, no charges, just a dead man, and a mystery they never tried too hard to solve. Some say he was silenced by someone on the inside. Others believe the inmates simply didn't care who he really was, only what he represented. Albert DeSalvo wanted to be remembered. He got his wish, but not as a man who found justice, as a man who was judged behind bars by his own kind. Number 12. Gerard Schaefer. He wore the badge, swore the oath, then used the handcuffs not to protect, but to trap. Gerard Schaefer was a Florida deputy sheriff. On the outside, he looked like law enforcement. On the inside, he was something else entirely. Between 1969 and 1972, Schaefer is believed to have tortured and murdered up to 30 young women. He would pick them up under the pretense of offering safety, then drive them deep into the woods. There, the games began, and they rarely ended quickly. His journals were found hidden in his mother's home. Hundreds of pages describing fantasies that blurred into reality. Victims were bound, hanged from trees, dismembered, defiled. Schaefer didn't just kill, he documented. Convicted for only 2 murders, he was sentenced to life. But inside the Florida State Prison, he couldn't keep quiet. He bragged, he mocked the dead. He claimed to have killed over 30, maybe more. For years, inmates listened, some in fear, some in disgust. One of them, in silence. On December 3rd, 1995, inmate Vincent Rivera entered Schaefer's cell. He didn't bring a message, he brought a blade. Schaefer was stabbed repeatedly, in the neck, in the eyes, in the face. A frenzy of rage, lesionized as a man who was judged, behind bars, by his own kind. Schaefer thought being a cop would shield him. He thought his intellect, his manipulation, his lies would protect him. But inside prison, there's no badge to hide behind, and monsters who brag eventually bleed. Number 11. Colin Hatch. Some men should never walk free. Colin Hatch was one of them. In 1993, he was convicted of abducting, sexually assaulting, and murdering a 7-year-old boy. The details were horrific, enough to make him one of Britain's most hated offenders. But after just 5 years, Hatch was released. And he did it again. In 2000, while still under supervision, Hatch lured another boy into his flat. This time, police found the body quickly. He was sent back to prison, this time for life. But life in prison wasn't punishment, it was preservation. Inside, Hatch was kept in a high-security unit, a high-risk prisoner surrounded by steel doors and silence. He bragged, he boasted, and he believed he'd never face what his victims did. But in 2011, the walls finally cracked. Damien Folks, another inmate, attacked Hatch in his cell. He brought a homemade blade and a ligature. There was no struggle, no noise. By the time the guards found them, it was over. Hatch had been stabbed repeatedly and strangled. His body left twisted on the floor, eyes open, mouth frozen. Folks didn't deny it. In fact, he explained it. He said, "I just wanted to get rid of evil." There was no remorse, no apology, only a cold calculation. One predator taking out another. Colin Hatch escaped justice once. But inside prison, there are no early releases, only consequences. And sometimes, they come from the cell next door. Number 10, Leslie Bailey. He entered the UK prison system already carrying the weight of national disgust. His name was tied to one of the country's most reviled criminal networks, a group the tabloids would later call the Dirty Dozen, a secretive ring responsible for the abduction, assault, and murder of young boys across Britain. Bailey confessed to multiple attacks. He gave up names. He described scenes so horrific the courtroom sat in silence. But prison isn't built for redemption. It's built for survival. And men like Bailey don't survive for long. On October 7th, 1993, inside Whitemoor Prison, two inmates, Michael Caine and John Brooks, attacked Bailey in his cell. What happened next wasn't spontaneous. It was surgical. They strangled him with a ligature, left him on the floor with the cord still wrapped tight around his neck. No cries for help. No one came running. When guards finally arrived, it was already over. But what raised more questions than answers was how easily it all happened. Caine and Brooks were fellow segregated inmates. They had access during a free association period. Some say the guards missed their rounds. Others believe the cell was left open deliberately. No official inquiry ever confirmed it. But in the corridors of Whitemoor, no one was surprised. Caine later said he did it because no one else would. He didn't apologize. He didn't hide, and the public didn't grieve. Leslie Bailey spent his life preying on the powerless. But in prison, stripped of protection, hated by all, he learned what powerlessness really feels like. There was no ceremony, no final words, just silence, and a door that never should have been open. Number 9, Robert Simon. He was a soldier for the Warlocks, a violent outlaw biker gang with a reputation built on fear. In 1982, Simon earned his rank the hard way. A murder committed in cold blood for the gang. Convicted, he went into the system wearing his crimes like a badge. He was proud of it. Behind bars, he carried himself like royalty, talking tough, walking harder. Other inmates stayed clear, but one didn't. Ambrose Harris was already serving time for a brutal crime of his own. He didn't fear Simon, and in 1999, they clashed in a recreational pen inside Trenton State Prison. The results were predictable, but not fast. One morning, correctional officers entered the pen and stepped into a scene of carnage. Simon's body was sprawled across the floor. He'd been beaten and stomped, not in a sudden outburst, but in a sustained, deliberate assault. Reports described defensive wounds and signs of prolonged suffering. Whatever had happened in that pen, it wasn't quick, and it wasn't quiet. Harris didn't run. He stood by, silent, unapologetic. No official motive was released, but those who knew both men say it was about dominance, not revenge. A challenge, a message, and Robert Simon lost. Number 8, Donald Harvey. He called himself a caregiver, but his patients never left the hospital alive. Donald Harvey was a hospital orderly, soft-spoken, polite, invisible in the halls of care, and behind that mask, a predator no one suspected. From 1970 to 1987, Harvey claimed the lives of at least 37 people, though investigators believe the number was far higher. He used arsenic, cyanide, insulin, plastic bags. Sometimes he suffocated them. Sometimes he injected poison into their IVs or drinks, all while smiling at their families. He called it mercy killing, said he was ending suffering. But as the truth unraveled, so did the lie. Harvey didn't kill to help. He killed to control, and he liked it. In 1987, he was sentenced to multiple life terms. Inside Ohio's prison system, Harvey kept a low profile until 2017. That year, he shared a cell with James Elliott Sharkey, a man with his own demons and no patience for Harvey's. On March 28th, guards found Harvey on the floor of his cell, bleeding, broken, barely conscious. He'd been beaten savagely, skull fractures, ribs shattered. The motive? Unclear. The outcome, inevitable. Harvey died 2 days later from blunt force trauma. Some say Sharkey found out who Harvey really was. Others believe the attack was random. But in a place where reputations are currency, word spreads fast, and Harvey's name carried rot. He spent his life taking it slow, quietly stealing breath from the helpless. But his own end came violently, without ceremony, on a cold prison floor. For years, he played God. In the end, someone else played judge, and the angel of death finally met one who didn't fear him. Number 7. Roger Kibe. He had a pattern, a signature. Roger Kibe, better known as the I-5 Strangler, was a former furniture salesman turned serial predator. From 1977 to 1987, he targeted women along California's Interstate 5. He offered rides. They never reached their destination. Kibe's method was chillingly precise. He used parachute cord, tied with surgical knots, to bind his victims. He cut their clothing in odd patterns, as if crafting trophies from their last moments. At least 7 women were confirmed dead. Some believe there were more. He was sentenced to life without parole. But inside Mule Creek State Prison, Kibe didn't fade away. He smiled. He joked with guards. He refused to speak about the victims, as if their pain never existed. But someone hadn't forgotten. On February 28, 2021, guards entered Kibe's cell and found a body. His body, strangled. A ligature wound around the neck. Classic asphyxiation. His own method mirrored back at him. His cellmate, Jason Boudreau, didn't hide it. He left a handwritten manifesto declaring the murder was deliberate, planned, and righteous. He called it justice. One killer, delivering punishment to another. Boudreau said Kibe's crimes haunted him, that someone needed to speak. For the women, no one could. There was a trial, and Boudreau was convicted. Roger Kibe stole breath from the innocent. And in the end, he lost his the same way. Number 6. Jose Antonio Rodriguez Vega. He stalked the frail, the women's society forgot, and turned them into numbers. Jose Antonio Rodriguez Vega, known across Spain as El Mataviejas, the old lady killer, was one of the country's most reviled predators. Between 1987 and 1988, he murdered 16 elderly women in the city of Santander. Most were found in their homes, strangled with scarves, belts, or bare hands. Some were sexually violated. Others were arranged to appear as natural deaths. The brutality wasn't fast. It was deliberate. He targeted women who lived alone. Women he knew would open the door. He worked as a repairman. And when they let him in, they sealed their fate. In court, he smiled, gave interviews, called himself a man misunderstood. He was sentenced to over 400 years in prison and sent to Topaz Penitentiary. For a while, he faded. No headlines, no interviews. But inside, his crimes never faded from memory. In 2002, Vega's time ran out. 2 fellow inmates, Enrique del Valle Gonzalez and Daniel Rodriguez Obeleiro, cornered him in the prison yard. They brought makeshift blades and heavy fists. Vega was stabbed repeatedly, beaten until he collapsed. Guards arrived late. Some say too late on purpose. The Spanish press didn't call it murder. They called it justice delayed. A long overdue sentence, delivered not by the courts, but by the forgotten hands of prison judgment. Jose died like many of his victims, alone, overpowered, and without mercy. Only this time, it was the weak who struck back. Number 5. Enriqueta Martí. She sold cures, tinctures, balms, potions promising youth, fertility, and healing. But the ingredients came soaked in blood. Enriqueta Martí was known in early 1900s, Barcelona as a healer, a woman who worked among the sick and desperate. But behind her front door, she hid a secret darker than folklore. She was accused of abducting children, some as young as 5, and murdering them in the name of black market remedies. Police claimed she used their fat, blood, and bones to create what she sold as miracle cures. Wealthy clients paid handsomely. No one asked questions. In 1912, it all unraveled when a girl escaped her apartment and alerted neighbors. Inside, authorities found children's clothing, human remains, and jars filled with unidentifiable substances. The media named her the Vampire of Barcelona. The public called for execution, but Marti never made it to trial. While awaiting sentencing inside Reina Amalia prison, she was attacked. On May 12, 1913, female inmates reportedly beat her to death. The prison's official report listed the cause as illness. No autopsy, no investigation, just a closed file, and a body no one claimed. Some say the prison guards allowed it. Others believe the attack was spontaneous, fueled by the stories that circulated through the cells. Whatever the truth, one fact remains. She died screaming, surrounded by those society had already deemed irredeemable, and even they saw her as worse. Number 4. Billy Kemmermeer. He was a former healthcare worker living in Texas. Between 2016 and 2018, nearly 24 elderly women died under suspicious circumstances across Dallas and Collin counties. All were found in their homes or assisted living facilities. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. Jewelry gone. Authorities eventually connected the pattern. The suspect, a man posing as a maintenance worker or medical aid. The method: smothering, silent, clean, efficient. Kemmermeer was charged in connection with the deaths of 22 women and suspected in more. He denied it all, claimed innocence. But the evidence, surveillance footage, stolen goods, and survivor testimony painted a different picture. He was convicted in 2022. Life sentence, no parole. But behind bars, justice moved faster. In September 2023, inside Texas's Caulfield unit, Kemmermeer was found dead. The cause: stabbed and beaten to death. His cellmate, Wyatt Busby, was immediately taken into custody. The motive: Kemmermeer's inappropriate comments about Busby's children. The man accused of smothering the defenseless, attacked in his cell and dragged into a hallway. There was a dispute, a trigger. Just one man locked in a cell with another whose crimes haunted the outside world. Some say it was revenge, others a message. What's certain is that Kemmermeer, who preyed on the frail, the trusting, the elderly, died not in silence, but in violence. Number 3. James Whitey Bulger. He ruled South Boston for decades, feared, untouchable, protected by the very agents sworn to catch him. James Whitey Bulger wasn't just a mob boss, he was a kingmaker. He ran rackets, extorted businesses, and ordered murders with a whisper. But behind the curtain, he had a second role: FBI informant. For years, Bulger gave up rivals to federal agents in exchange for protection. His enemies disappeared, his empire thrived, and when the heat finally turned on him in 1994, he vanished, gone for 16 years. When he was finally captured in 2011, living in Santa Monica under an alias, the fall was thunderous. Bulger was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 2 life terms. But what the courts delivered didn't compare to what came next. In 2018, at age 89, Bulger was transferred to USP Hazleton, a high-security federal prison in West Virginia. Within hours, he was dead. Surveillance footage showed him wheeled into the general population. Moments later, inmates entered his cell with a lock attached to a belt. They didn't just beat him, they made a statement. Bulger's skull was fractured. It wasn't personal, it was policy. A message echoed in prison yards and back alleys for generations: snitches get slaughtered. The suspected ringleader, Fotio's Freddy Gayas, was a known mafia enforcer. He despised informants, and Bulger's name was top of the list. No one intervened, no one knocked. By the time guards found him, Bulger's face was bloodied, struck by a single fatal blow. He died just like the people he once betrayed, alone, silenced. Number 2. Carl Williams. In the streets of Melbourne, his name meant power. Carl Williams wasn't just a drug dealer, he was the architect of a criminal empire. Ruthless and calculating, he rose through Australia's underworld during the infamous Melbourne Gangland Wars. He ordered hits, made enemies disappear, and for a time, he controlled it all from the shadows. But power comes with a price, and in 2007, the law caught up. Williams was sentenced to life for multiple murders his empire shattered. But inside Barwon prison, he found a new way to survive. He started talking. In 2010, Williams became a cooperating witness. He fed investigators information about police corruption, exposing dirty officers who'd once protected him. It wasn't redemption, it was strategy. But in prison, there's a word for men like that, and it's fatal. On April 19th, 2010, the cameras inside Barwon captured the last moments of Carl Williams. He was sitting in the day room, alone, reading a newspaper, unarmed, relaxed. Then came Matthew Johnson, a convicted killer, known enforcer, and declared enemy of informants. He approached quietly, gripped the stem of an exercise bike seat, and swung. The first blow crushed Williams's skull. 7 more made sure he wouldn't stand back up. Then silence. The guards responded late. By the time they reached him, Carl Williams was gone, a pool of blood spreading across the concrete. Johnson stood nearby, calm. He later said, "Dogs get put down." Williams betrayed killers, cops, and codes. But in that room, none of it mattered. What mattered was that someone watched and did nothing. Number 1. Jeffrey Dahmer. He wasn't just a killer, he was a blueprint for depravity. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee monster, didn't just end lives, he erased identities. 17 victims. Most were young men, many of them vulnerable, forgotten by society. He lured them into his apartment with promises of money, photos, or shelter. What followed defied comprehension. Molestation, dismemberment, necrophilia, cannibalism. He kept body parts in his fridge, photographed his victims mid-process, drilled into their skulls while they were still alive, trying to make zombies he could control. When police finally arrested him in 1991, they found a horror scene dressed in ordinary furniture. A severed head in the fridge, Polaroids of mutilated bodies, a vat of acid used to dissolve flesh. In court, Dahmer confessed with a calm voice and dead eyes. He received 15 life sentences, but life, for him, had an expiration date. By 1994, Dahmer was held at Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. He wasn't just another inmate, he was the inmate, the one everyone knew, the one even murderers couldn't stomach. There were rumors he joked about his crimes in the cafeteria, that he used ketchup to mimic blood, that he mocked his victims and dared others to react. On November 28th, Dahmer was assigned cleaning duty. He entered a bathroom with 2 other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. Only one walked out. Scarver later claimed the prison staff set it up, that they left the 3 men alone, unsupervised, in a space where tension thrived. Inside, Scarver grabbed a metal bar from the weight room. He struck Dahmer first, then Anderson. The blow crushed Dahmer's skull. When they found him, he was bloodied and broken. Scarver later said he was told by God to do it, that Dahmer's taunting and lack of remorse pushed him to act, that someone had to carry out justice. The system didn't finish. The guards claimed it was routine, but inmates said otherwise. They called it intentional, calculated, a silent approval from those who didn't dare say it out loud. Jeffrey Dahmer lived in darkness, but in the end, he didn't die by court order. He died by consequence, because even in the depths of a prison, some monsters don't get to rest. These weren't heroes, they weren't avengers, they were killers, killing killers. Some of these deaths were chaotic, some were calculated, but every one of them carried a message, written not in ink, but in blood. Now it's your turn. Which of these deaths do you believe was karma? Should prisoners be protected, even when the world wants revenge? And which case shocked you the most? Tell us in the comments below, because behind bars, truth doesn't always survive, but stories like these always do.